Good morning. I'm Beis. We are on the top of page 1235. Aleph Reish Lamed Hey. Ayin Beis, volume 3. These pages can be found, if you wish, at ayinbeis.com, PDF of all these pages. Okay. So, what we learned yesterday was, firstly, we finished the Samach Vav to discuss Chochma in the context of, in contrast to Binah, I should say, that the Chochma experiencing the divine within our consciousness. It's not a superconscious experience like faith or Mesiras Nefesh or other deeper soul forces. It's in our consciousness, but it's the highest level of consciousness possible. Like we spoke about Mudva, Murgish, Muskel, where the focus is not on me understanding it in its details, where each detail evokes a different type of emotion. And yes, a cognitive emotion and then an actual emotion. But here, it's the very experience itself that defines it all. Being absorbed in this Chochma experience, which is only like a Nakuda, but it too will have an effect on the emotions. Like he says, Lepomim, sometimes it will express itself in love, sometimes in awe, but it's all coming from that one singular experience. And he added, and this is also the place where his scholarless, like he said, his scholarless amidis zem b'chinas ha'chochma dafke. So though Binah understands and also comes to the conclusion that the emotions should work with each other, but that's more of a cognitive process. Chochma is the actual force that connects it all, and the root of that is scholarless. And then finally, in the parentheses, at the bottom of page 1234 and the top of 1235, he spoke about the tziruf, that the very fact that we're able to easily and seamlessly and effortlessly combine letters to create words. That, where does that come from? That ability to just do that. So he says that comes from Chochma, that's higher than kavona, das and kavona. That was the words he used. Binah, as we said, as we learned earlier, breaks it down into different expressions. The words he used is kalos is chalkos the esis hamachshava hem b'chinas gvuras the ima, because that's what Binah does. It breaks down ideas into details, and therefore also the letters and the words that are expressing those. Chochma is a uniter that shows you the, like we said before, hanocha sichlis, that type of resonance, or the kavona pnimis hakavona be'etzem nekudas hamuskel. It's not about the details. So if you're thinking about building a home, Binah focuses on what is this home going to need, what the details, what are the specifics, what's the structure. Chochma is focusing on what's the deeper intention behind it. So in the context of contemplating about elokus, about godliness, so Binah brings it into structure. Chochma is the very nature of what is godliness and being absorbed in that experience. So as far as the words go, that's also why Chochma creates words. We're not talking, he says, when it comes to know what expressions you want to use to convey an idea, there, he said, at times, how to actually express it. That's the general, which way you're going to express it, which ideas are you going to use. In these words or those words, the different ways we express things. But once you already are doing it, the actual be'etzem atzir of this is ein sarich l'chavin klal. Okay. Abi Yosef Brato, that from there comes from the Kadmus HaSeichel, meaning before the actual structure of intelligence, from its earliest roots. That's where letters come from and also their combination. And the last thing was what he said in the parentheses was from the Maimer Vayas Kolov. So I want to go over that right now. Let me just, where's that volume one? Hold on. Let me just bring the sefer here. No, that's volume 2. 1 minute. Okay. So here he qualified this by saying that we learned earlier in this mimer, the mimerim that talk at length about, we learned that the previous page, he cited it. The ones that talk about hischalkus and hiskalus, the distinction and the interconnectivity. So we spoke that Binah is more of a distinction, but also comes from the distinction, from the separation, also comes to a understanding of the interconnectivity of things. On the other hand, Chochma introduces bittul that allows distinct entities to leave room for another, like I gave the example with mediation. So there at length talks about these topics. You remember on previous page, he cited 2 of those Maimarim from volume 1. So now he qualifies this by saying that in Vayas Kolov, the Maimar Yas Kolov, he says this comes from the Shlemus of Moichen Diyanika. Now it seems obvious that what we're up to now, we've reached higher than Yanika. Yanika is when the child is still in its nursing stage. So yes, basically that's the stage when a child begins to speak. We're talking about the first few years of its life. And Shlemus of Moichen Yanika is like when the end of the nursing process, when the Moichen Yanika are developed enough and you see a child is speaking clearly, not still learning how to speak. They don't have all the words and ideas, obviously, but a child is a speaking child, whether it's 3 years old or 4 years old or whatever the age may be. So he said there, it comes from Shleifus Meichen Diyanika. Now, the truth is, it's not really a question because he's not stating here that speech itself requires the highest levels of Meichen. He's just saying of Chochma. He's saying Chochma is the place that creates that seamlessness. So a child, a young child could also have Chochma. They don't have the Chochma we're talking about here, that after Binah you've come to experience the divine on this purest level. But nevertheless, in the thoroughness of the Rebbe Rashab, he's bringing that it says it comes from Meichen Diyanika, Umakol Mokim, he says, it explained there that it's Chai Sheba Medaber, which means immediately it's not Medaber Sheba Medaber. So what does he explain there? He explains that, if I recall correctly, I just wanted to check it out, just look inside. He explained in that mimer in volume 1 that in a human being, we know there's Doimim Tzemeach Chaim Medaber. So everything is mineral, vegetable or plant, animal, and human. He said that in the human being itself, we also have all 4. That's what he says there. So, and that also, if you remember when we started this topic, I said that it also talks there about the development of Ibur, Yunik, and Meichen. So to fully understand what it says here, it's good to learn what he says back there. But what he did, so let me just quote what I wanted. I just want to look at exactly what he was relevant to our discussion here. So he speaks very similar, that there's Nehi, Chagas, Chabad, Ibur, Yunik, and Meichen. I don't know if he uses the words there, Mudva, Murgish, and Muskel, but he definitely uses the first 3, Ibur, Yunik, and Meichen. And as a person grows, it starts from the behavioral, the Ibur, then it goes to Yunika, which is more of and which also has some Meichen in it. And then goes to Meichen itself, where the intellect is the dominant force. Exactly like we learned it here. Okay. So then in chapter 256 there, as he moves from the behavioral, he moves to Yunika emotions. I'm looking at the bottom of page, if you want to look it up, page 517 in volume 1 in the edition that I have here, not the later editions. So he says like this. Let's see, 1 second. I'm not finding what I want to look right now, to be honest. I was talking from memory, and I thought it would be right obvious. I can't find the midrash of a medaber. Okay, let me just tell it to you from what I remember, and then I'll try to find it inside. I thought it would be right on top of this page. Okay. What I recall is like this, that the true medaber of medaber is the highest level in seichel. Like what we're talking here, ibur yunika moichin, or muskel, mutva murgish muskel. But the development of speech, which Chochma creates that seamless flow, or what we said, that siruf, that creates the combination of letters that without any effort, that a child already has, even at a young age, he called that chai sheba medaber. Because chai is like the life force. A child has a life force, even though it's not fully developed in the full intelligent development, but it's something is there. And he says that's like the dibur of a child, where the dibur is complete, but it's not yet the highest level of seichel. So he's basically qualifying and saying that even though here we're discussing Chochma as a muskel, the highest level, nevertheless, the element of speech, that siruf, begins earlier. So Chochma is already having an impact, but it's still called chai sheba medaber because it's talking about speech. You're not talking about pure intelligence. Though a child can speak easily, like we're learning here, and it doesn't take any effort to combine letters into words, but still, you can't compare a child to a major scholar or someone who's on the highest levels of Chochma. So he called that chai sheba medaber. So that's the qualification regarding this parentheses, where he's saying that Chochma is the root of the tziruf, of the ability to combine letters. So, in other words, that's on a basic level. Then Chochma, of course, in its more full-blown, is what we're learning here about the ability to be absorbed in a divine experience. That is a far higher level within Chochma, which would be called more medaber sheba medaber. I'll look it up. I want to find exactly where it says that. I don't see it right offhand, but I think that's really what it says. But again, I'm saying it from memory. So so that's the parentheses. Fine. If anybody wants to ask anything, please do. If now, I will continue after the parentheses on page 1235. Any questions? No? Okay. Good. So now we continue. The line after the parentheses is the sixth line from the top fifth line from the top of the page. Now he's going to go back. Remember, we're talking here within consciousness. We're not talking about a state that you're going outside of the whole realm of structure altogether. Chochma, within the human capacity to experience something outside of itself, or greater than itself, I should say. Binah is not completely outside of it. That's why it doesn't change the natural structure of our emotions. Chochma is the capacity to be absorbed in a divine reality that's greater than you are. Exactly like being absorbed when you're looking at, similar to being absorbed when you're looking at a painting, beauty, anything where your whole being is lifted up to that place. So on one hand, it's beyond his chalkus, because like we said, it comes from one experience. It doesn't have the breakdown of Binah, but now he's going to say that it does not mean that it's completely beyond the structure. So he says, Umukol mokim. And nevertheless, harigam mebchinas chochma, or mebchinas chochma, yesh is chalkus. Down below, they say a missing word, which is obvious. That also for chochma, yesh is chalkus. There's also ischalkus. There's also distinction. The experience is one that's an uplifted place where you just feel completely part of something greater than yourself. But also from there comes ischalkus. Shari mokar amidus Hein b'chochma. Because the root of midas, of emotions, are in chochma. Now you say, 1 second, didn't we just say the root of emotions, the source of emotions is Binah? So let's be patient, he'll explain. Basically, it's like the father and the mother. Remember, a child needs a father and a mother. The mother is where the child has developed, the mother's womb. But Chochma is part of the process. Chochma provides the seed. So it's true, it's still in a seed-like form. So it's all united. But to say that it's not a source for emotions at all, that's not correct. As a matter of fact, Chochma is even the source of Binah. Binah is developing the idea of Chochma, except the Chochma experience is one that lifts everything up, and it's in the seed-like state of a higher reality, as I'm discussing. So he says like this, so Chassidus explains, these are the cedar trees that Yaakov planted in Mitzrayim. So the Jews later would have the cedar wood to build the Mishkan and everything they would need. So Chassidus explains that Arzei Levona, even though they were planted, the seeds were planted before, later they'll become full-blown trees. So Chassidus says that's the Nekuda of Chochma that Yaakov planted. Shein HaMidas K'mo Shein B'Chochma. They're the midas that later grow into becoming full entities, blossom into trees. Like we learned, this whole thing is a process of growth. Adam Eitz Asada, like a tree that's growing. So the seeds are already rooted in Chochma. Like the letters, we just said before that the letters are rooted Kadmus HaSeichel, and also their combination. He says those letters are rooted in Chochma. Then they come into manifest in distinction. In other words, you need to have the seed first. So even though it's true on that state, it's still all connected, but it's the beginning and the process of the process that will break down into parts. Just like a seed in the ground will turn into a tree with all its components. And what is this level? He says, this is the level, V'hu Inyan, Gvuras da Abba. This is the Gvura within Abba. The Abba Chochma also has Gvuras. Remember, we learned on previous page that the actual breakdown comes from Gvuras, the Ima. So Ima, the mother Binah has Gvura, because Gvura, let me just explain, is in general, whenever you need distinction, whenever you need a diversity or some type of measure to separate something into parts, Gvura is always the tool for that. In other words, Chesed is the oyer itself, is the flow. But if you want to channel that flow and you wanted to direct it in different directions, Gvura is the tool that God uses for that. Similar to Tzimtzum and oyer. Oyer is the flow. Gvura creates a direction, directs the flow. So the kav, for example, which is a thin ray of light, kav v'chut, it's a line, a thread, that follows the tzimtzum. Oyer without Gvura is oyer before the tzimtzum. Completely seamless, all-encompassing, it's everywhere. So Gvura is always the force that directs and guides things. So in this context, Ima has its Gvuras, and Chochma, we know also, every sphere has all the spheres in it. Chochma is Gvura Sheba Chochma. Or what he's calling Gvuras ad the Abba. Gvura is the Abba, Shagvuras in Yonim hu lachlik. The inyan of Gvura is to separate, is to divide. Though שבבחינת חוכמה הוא כמו הציר בגוף גשם וחומר אחד שאין החומר משחלק בזה. So he's giving an example to understand, because on one hand we said Chochma, everything is united like in a seed. On the other hand, you're saying there's the source for distinction. So he gives it a physical example, that it's like the tzir beguf geshem v'chemer echad she'en hachemer mischalik b'zeh. So when you take, let's say, a raw piece of clay or any matter, and you haven't yet shaped it into any specific form. It says, but this is going to become later a full-blown, let's say, a little sculpture. Or you're going to turn it into a menorah with 7 different branches. Right now, it's a piece of clay, or a piece of gold, or a piece of silver, whatever it may be. It's an alloy, but it's not yet divided. So he's saying that's the example. Chochma, who kamay had seer beguf geshem. You're creating a seer there, means you're beginning to create the shape in it, but it's not. It's all in one piece of material that's not yet broken into details. So he's not saying exactly is he creating the general shape, or you just have that material in which the shape will be created. But that is what he's explaining. So to say that the details that will come later just come on their own, they don't. They will begin with this chomer. So this seed of Chochma is what he's calling here the tzir beguf geshem v'chemechesh eina chemer meschalik b'zeh. The chemer is not yet divided by it. It's one piece of clay, whatever it may be. But he's going to continue, so we'll get it clear. Haksuvim b'sefer ala klaf, like letters that are written in a book on parchment. Shaklafu etzem echad. The klaf, the very parchment, is one body. The parchment is not made up of parts. It's a piece of parchment. Let's say a mezuzah or tefillin or a sefer Torah. I'm not talking about the whole sefer Torah where they mix. They have to tie together different parchments. But I'm talking about one piece of parchment, shebay mitztayir in my asis, where you then shape or what's the word I want to use? Not create mitztayir. You draw the letters. Va'klaf eina mischalak l'chalokim. So even when you're drawing the letters, the klaf itself, which is upon which the letters are, the canvas, if you wish, here's parchment, does not break into parts. Even when the parts will be written, it's still one piece. So he's comparing Chochma to the klaf, to the parchment, and without saying as much, he's saying that Binah he's going to speak about in a moment, I think. But Binah is where you would actually write the actual letters. So he gave 2 examples so far. One is he didn't give an example for that. He just said it's like an image made in the very matter of something, and that matter is one thing. And then he gave an example, a parchment that's not made up of parts, and upon which you draw the letters, and the klaf eina mischalik l'chalokim, and the parchment does not break down into parts, to pieces. Now another example, like koil hadibur. So when you speak, there are 2 things happening. It's not just the words are being said, you also have the breath, the voice. You can be wanting to say words, but if your voice is not working, for whatever reason, God forbid, nothing will come out. So you need to have a voice. So when I do, that's a voice. When I say words, the voice now is taking on the shape of the letters that I am using. But it's 2 things, voice and words. So he says, Koil hadibur shesevel kol hayischalkus. This voice contains every possible way of expression. Whether I'm going to say aleph beis or I'm going to say words, different words, they're all coming from a koil poshet. That's what he's saying here. So sevel kol hayischalkus da atzirufi esis. It contains and encompasses all the different ways of all the permutations and combinations of letters. But it's one voice. So the voice, there's the voice part of it, like the sound, and then there's how the sound is being shaped. It would just be like, let's say you were blowing through a flute, but you were not using the flutes, the holes in the flute to shape the voice. It would just be one flow, one sound. And then that sound is then shaped into expressions through different words, letters and words. But the koil is koil echad. So it's like the parchment, one parchment with letters, one voice and all different types of letters and words that are spoken. And same as with Chochma, that it's not completely separate from any distinction. It's just a state that is not yet defined by distinction. It's in a form of shapeless or seamless or shapeless. It carries and contains and encompasses. I mean, sevel literally means sometimes to tolerate, but here sevel means carrying, that it contains and carries and allows for. You'll say allows for. That's where the overlap with tolerance. It allows for, and Neisa carries and allows for kol tziyurim, all forms of tziyurim. Remember, we said that Chochma was compared to water, to fluid, and all different types of ideas can come from it. Chesed, Gvura, different theories. That's what Chochma is about. Like we learned earlier in the Maimer Achar Sha'alti, which is in volume 2. Okay, the song is wrong. As we discussed earlier in the Maimer Achar Sha'alti. The truth is that Achar Sha'alti was also referred to, I mentioned it yesterday, here on top of page, the bottom of page 1215 and top of 1216, even though he did not cite the Achar Sha'alti there, did he? Oh yeah, he did. On the bottom of 1215, he also cites the same Maimer, and that's where he discusses as well. Where Chochma is like, think of it like the seed, a clean slate, but it's a slate, and upon it you have the imagery and the details shaped by Binah. Right. Okay. Any questions? Okay, so to explain why is the Rebbe Rashab emphasizing this point in the first place? I mean, what's missing? Because remember, we're looking for the interface. We want to have the Chochma experience, but we don't want it in the point where it's completely beyond who we are. So he's now bringing back that even though Chochma lifts the whole person to a higher divine reality and we're absorbed in it, but it's not completely devoid of relationship with us. I'll just give you my visualization of it. I'll just give a type of let's say I'm losing for what's the word you use, like an imaginary journey. Think of an imaginary journey. You and I, and each one of us, is a fully shaped adult at this point. You have your body, your brain, your face, all your features, all your faculties from head to toe. Okay? Let's say we were able to go back in time and go backwards to the point when we were little children, but then to the point when we were a fetus in our mother's womb, and then to the point where we were all in one cell, fertilized egg by the seed, and even before that. It's somewhat like what scientists try to do when they're trying to retrace the Big Bang. What was it like back then? So they can observe something that is a reflection like a star, that's, let's say, millions of light years away from us. If you can observe it in its own place, you can see how it would have been back then. They try to replicate this. So in some ways, when you're reading this, as I'm telling you my feeling of it, it's like, here we are, whoever you are, you want to connect to your source, to get back to where you were. So Binah takes you, well, let's start with the Midas. Mutva, Murgish, Muskel. Mutva, Midas take you to your experience, emotional experience. So maybe, yes, you'd like to go back to pure, more innocent emotions before they were tainted or corrupted or polluted by life. Not talking about whether intentional or not intentional, just by life's experience. You go back to Binah. So Binah gives you more of a reflective experience, but it's very much around the structure of your life. Chochma takes you back into like the seed of who you really are, in the seed level, the way God planted you in that purest form. But it's not completely beyond. It is you as you are in that original state, like the genesis of your being. In many ways, when you learn Chassidus, that's really what the objective is. It's to take who you are and help you understand yourself in pure levels. Like when we say the neshama comes, every morning we say, neshama shenasata bi tahirihi. Then we say, ata barasha, ata yitzarta, ata nefachta bi, va'ata meshamra bikirbi. So I'll translate. The soul you've given me is pure. Then you created it. You shaped it. You instilled it. You imbued it. You breathed it within me. And you protect it inside me. Now, when you really think about this, what does this mean? It means the soul is going through a journey. And every morning, that journey is recreated from the Atzilus Tahira through Bria, Yetzira, Asiya, and God protects it in this world where it needs protection. So in essence, every davening, every prayer is really going back to who you are in a pure form, like who you are, who you could have been, who you should have been. And it's not meant to be just a flight of fancy. It's meant to access that part of you that's right now alive as well. Except we live in the here and now, so we get distracted by whatever life comes our way, and it's hard for us to get to that mindset or heart set of how we are in a deeper level, how we are in God's mind, if you wish. That's already a very high level. But how we are in the pure form of an neshama before it journeys into this material and coarse world and corrupt world. So every night when we go to sleep, one of the beautiful things, why is there sleep? So on a scientific level, it's to refresh and regenerate and reinvigorate and revitalize human beings' cells and so on, so we can begin a fresh day. But in a Ruchnisdika level, it's because if we never went to sleep, we would become complete slaves and completely subjugated to the realities of our daily lives. Sleep is a way like a break from the material world in which we are so involved in. You go to sleep, your soul gets refreshed. That's what it says. It goes back to the fountains, spiritual fountains of energy that refresh it. The body obviously gets reinvigorated. That's all correct as well. And in the morning, not only are you physically refreshed, your soul has now been refreshed from its source. And that's why we say, neshama, first we say, moda ani, shechzarta bi nishmasi, and then we spell it out. The neshama is a pure soul. Then it travels until it goes back to the realities as we know it here. But now it's been reminded, and more than reminded, reconnected, like back to recharged, back to the power source of those higher levels. So the process of mudva murgish muskel is really those levels of growth and development generally, but also in avodah, the different levels of behavioral, emotional, all the way to the Chochma experience. So that's why he's making such a big point to say that as much as Chochma takes you back to that place, it's not disconnected and divorced from the structure of who you are. It's only a state like the cloth, like the parchment or the voice that's not consumed with the details, but it's really behind the scenes. It's everything. That all the details will be shaped in the Chochma experience. But right now we're talking about the Chochma experience. So it's higher than Ischalkus technically, but it doesn't mean it's going to remain that way. It means you want to go back to it's like going back to the clean parchment, so to speak, before the letters were shaped. And then we reshape the letters. and we draw down into the structure of our lives. That's how I would put this into proper context to really fully appreciate what he's saying here. Okay, I hope that was helpful. So, okay. So
and
now we're up to...
It's Gvura that ultimately shapes the Oasis and the Tsarufim. So when you're in that, call it state of potential where you have an opportunity to, let's say, reshape or transform your midos, then of course it's avoided generally that you have to do to make a change. But initially it's Gvura that begins to shape or reshape the midos. Is that correct?
Which Gvura are you talking? Gvura of Abba or of Ima?
Yes.
Of Chochma,
I
meant
of Abba. Well, I don't know. I'm not sure. That's why I'm asking.
Well, the answer is very straightforward. The Gvura of Abba is the potential shapes that will come in this on the shapeless parchment or voice, and Binah will actually create the actual letters details. So on Chochma, it's more in Yonim. It's more the potential structures that will be developed, that will emerge in this level. That's what he says here. So
you have to work it out with Binah ultimately.
Well, real structure is going to have Binah, yeah.
And
well, that's why he referred us to the Maimer Achash Alti, the page I shared with you, page 1216, talks about how Binah does that. So in the Maimer Achash Alti in volume 2 and earlier on page 1216 is discussed a little more in detail. Here he's focusing on the Chochma level, but that's where it talks about that. So the parchment is basically carries, like he says, carries and contains all the shapes that will come out of it. And that is the Gvuras of Abba, and Gvuras of Ima will actually shape it, like he said on previous page, in the parentheses. Like a third down the top of the page. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
And we can say furthermore, Shekel v'dibur, that the voice and speech, which work hand in hand, speech is just empty letters. I'm saying empty letters, just letters. Koil is what carries it and gives it sound. So essentially sound and speech, better than voice and speech. Let's say sound and speech. I think that's a better way to say koil, sound. Even though it's also voice, but it's really the sound, it's just the shapeless sound. Even though the sound of the voice is equal in all the combinations, no matter what letters or words you say, the voice, the sound is the same. I mean, I'm not talking about the fluctuations of the sound. We're talking about the very sound that's expressed is equal. Nevertheless, the sound as well does break down into parts. As was explained earlier, Dibra Maskal B'Yem Ashmini Atzeres. Explained in the Maimer B'Yem Ashmini Atzeres, which I am looking up right now. I want to just see what it says there. Okay, so he says sound, even the very sound is also made up of what he calls Eish, Mayim, and Ruach, fire, water, and air. Or as he says, there's a sound that can be thicker, there's a sound that can be subtler. So in other words, even though the sound you can't say breaks into letters, but to say that it's completely equal is also not correct. Maybe he's also, I don't know the fluctuations of the sound he's counting here. I don't think so. But there he says, because the sound itself also has different variations. Okay. And v'zehu mipnei, and this is due to the fact she'eschalkus hu al-yedei esis, that the distinction between is the distinction in the sound is created through the letters. Shein davar b'fnei atzmei min hakoel. They're a separate thing from the sound and the voice. V'heim b'bchinas mitzias davar. The letters, they are already a mitzias davar. Letters have actually an identity. They have some substance, a shape and form. U'lechein hakoel miskali gam behem al kaponim l'chalokim. And that's why the sound also divides within them al kaponim to different sounds. In other words, I believe what he's saying is that the sound, let's say, of the word aleph is different than the sound Beis. So there's an element in the sound that's equal. They both come from, they're both part of your voice and sound, but they take on the shape of the letter. So even though the letter itself that you're expressing is a separate entity, like he says, but the sound that's entering there gets shaped by that separate entity. So it'd be like something like a colorless liquid traveling through colored glass, through tinted glass. So the colorless liquid on its own is beyond color. But when it travels through, let's say, a blue tube or a red tube or a green tube, it takes on that color. Now, the liquid itself doesn't become colored because it's only the glass, but it appears that way, and it's able to go. I think here it's even more than that. Here it would be like the liquid, the colorless liquid actually take on the color. So in other words, the sound on its own could be completely shapeless. But once it expresses itself through letters that are absolutely shaped and defined, the voice too and the sound too takes on that shape, even though the voice still remains, the sound remains beyond shape, but it takes on the shape. So he's making the connection between the achdus, the Chochma, and its relationship with Binah and with the Midas, a little deeper. In other words, Chochma on its own remains beyond, but as it becomes to be expressed, the Chochma too is involved in that process and affected by it. That's what he's saying here. Mashenken b'Chochma. Oh, 1 second here. Oh, maybe I didn't read it right. Let me go back. One second. I thought he was talking about Chochma. Now that he says Mashenken b'Chochma, I thought the Yeshlemer Oid Yosher was coming to explain Chochma on a deeper level. Now I'm not so sure. Let me just look at this again. Yeah, Chochma shebchinas pshitis hanesa v'sevel kol tzir. Good. Yeshlemer Oid Yosher. Shakel v'dibri me shakel shav kol tzir. Maybe the Yesh Lemer is coming to say that when it comes to the koil, it's more connected to the Ischalkus. Mashenken b'Chochma, by contrast, Chochma, Shamidas Sham Einam B'chinas Mitzias Klal Kanal. Let me read on and let's see where he goes with this. The Midas are not at all existent there. So in other words, on the level of the voice and sound, it's not there at all. Which means also also the distinctions is shapeless. They're not at all in any form of distinction. It sounds like in the Yesh Lemer that he's qualifying and saying that with the koil and dibur, you could say the koil does channel itself and does ultimately relate to that ischalkus. Whereas in the midas and chochma, there's no ischalkus at all. It's all on a level of pshitus. So now it's distinguishing between the sound and the speech and chochma. Chochma being higher. That's what it looks like. But let me continue and see where he's going with this before I conclude. And now he gives another example. Like the look of the face. A person, the image of one's face. So a face has an image. Face is no ein parts of and shavis. No two faces are alike. So every face has its look. You know, the eyes, the nose, the mouth, the ears, the complexion, the forehead, the brow, the chin. So a face is an image. It's one face. So he says, so the etzem of the person is mitztayir, is shaped and defined by this tzir of his face. The ein kan dover nesef. And there's no outside or extra element. It's not coming from the outside. The face is an expression of the person. Tzir upon him. And everything is that core, and there's no separate entities at all. What I believe he's saying is that when you look at a person's face, you don't see it as a sum of the parts. You don't see like, okay, here the ears, the nose. You see my face, you recognize me immediately because you have a picture of my face, not just of one part of it. So it's basically like the etzem of the face. The main primary force is not the details, but the very face itself. That's what it sounds like he's saying. Not 1,000%, but it looks like it. What does that mean? There are separate parts. A face is made up of parts, but not when you look at the face, when you say, this is that person's face, that recognition of one face is that way. As a matter of fact, it just reminds me, there was this book called Drawing on the Right Side Drawing with the Right Side of Your Brain. It was a very famous book years ago. And it was interesting explaining why is it that it's so difficult for us to paint. Why can't you go and draw the image of a face of a person you know, or even your own face? Try it out. It's almost impossible. You can't even get anything right. Now think about it a moment. You see the face, you can look at the face, and here you take a pencil or pen or ink or whatever it may be, and why don't you just copy exactly the face? Why is it that we can't do that? So they talk about an experiment in an art class where they took one of the most famous faces in the American world, face of Abraham Lincoln. We all know the face of Abraham Lincoln. Look on the penny. Every penny has Abraham Lincoln. And they asked the students to draw the face of Abraham Lincoln. As I just said, no one was able to do it. I'm not talking about the few gifted artists that have an ability. Then, what they told them to do? Interesting. They told them to turn the picture of Abraham Lincoln upside down. And there was a 70% improvement in the drawing, which sounds completely like counterintuitive. When you see the face, it would seem like easier. Because the face, you're not really able to capture details because you just see the face. When they turned it upside down, they didn't see a face really. I mean, yeah, you could guess, but you don't see it. So you focus on just the pure technical details. It's like someone say to you, here's a picture of a pot. Copy a pot. That's easy to do, or a house. I'm not talking about the details because you're not taken by the face creates some image in us. It's like a picture of a face that doesn't really see the details at all. Now, a good artist, I assume, knows how to do that. They know how to get beyond the face and they just look at each detail and they just do it the right way. And then they make sure it's accurate. So it just comes to mind when I'm reading this, sounds exactly like that. So you see the face, you don't see the details. So Chochma is you see the picture instead of the actual breakdown of the details. If that indeed is the mashal, which I 99% feel it is, It's an unbelievable example of experiencing something, the same thing, but it's a level that's higher than the hischalkus of it, even though there is a structure. That's what it seems like he's saying. Okay. So now I think we'll understand it with this concluding section now. V'yesh leimer, and we can say, this is the difference when Binah paints or draws the shapes. In within Chochma, so Chochma is before their shape. This is the difference between Binah Mitzayot and Chochma. The Yeshkan Dvarim HaMechalkim. When Binah is actually drawing it, there are things that distinguish one from the other. And what is the comparison to? And this is the distinction between Ubein HaYischalkus and B'chinas HaGvur is the Abba Atzmei. Okay, so he's literally stating here what we talked about before, the difference between Gvuras of Ima and Gvuras of Abba. So this we could say is the difference. When Binah is shaping it within the cloth, within the shapeless background, let's say, of Chochma, of the seed of Chochma, and how those same midas, and how that Ischalkus is within Gvuras of Abba Atzmei, which is not yet in a state of distinction. Like it says elsewhere, Be'inyan miksha tasa hamenera. That when you make the menera, you have to make it from one solid piece of gold. You can't make little pieces and bring them and graft them together. They took one piece of gold that was shapeless, and in that they engraved and sculpted it. I should say they sculpted it and shaped it. What's the word I wanted to use? Like a carved and sculpted and shaped it till it became a menorah. So he says, why? Well, God, it could have been a lot easier. God could have said, go into a workshop and create little pieces like they do, like you put together a car or something like that. You create the branches, you create the flowers, you create the cups, whatever. And then come and graft them together, melt them together, smelt them together. No, it had to be one miksha achas. So it says elsewhere, it explains this idea that the shape and form had to be done in that one guf, in that one entity, because that is a sign of real achdus. God did not want his chalkus. He wanted from the unity itself, the unified piece, the one solid piece should be shaped. Not that you starting off with shapes, because he wanted that to be the way it is. So that's the difference. Binah is the one that's shaping it. Chochma, it's like that one piece of gold, or he used parchment, he used the voice, or the sound, and then Binah creates the letters and the specifics. And according to this, another parenthesis, hu inyan selam udmus. When we say the human being was created b'tzalmenu, kitsalmenu b'dmusenu, what's selam and dmus? They both seem to mean the same thing. Selam is like an image, dmus is a likeness. So he says, v'hainu dechochma hi b'tzalmenu, that's b'tzalmenu, so there is an image, but it's like the image of the face. The focus is on the unified element. Ubina nikra kidmusenu. And Binah is kidmusenu. Dmus is already more of a shape, more the focus on the shape details. Ukamation is barley ill. This was discussed at length in the beginning of volume 2, actually. Or maybe more places as well. So what's the point? Binah is also not pure distinction. It's also details within one entity. But it's like when you're saying words and letters, they're still connected with each other. But you're starting to see and discern distinctions. Yesh leimer. I'm going to read to the end of the paragraph. Oh, one second here. This may require a lot more than I thought. Okay, I thought he was just he's introducing the gvura of Abba become chesed of Binah. Okay, you know what? I'll read it, then I'll explain tomorrow. It says, Yesh leimer, that this is the inyan, that the gvuras of Abba, which we just said are distinction, but they're distinction within a very shapeless, in a shapeless way. Nasim chsodim d'ima. They become the chesed of ima. What does that mean? Because even the distinctions in Abba and Chochma are still in a shapeless form, like everything included inside of a seed, or like the face you described. Since it's shapeless, that's why from this is created, it comes, evolves the chsodim of ima she'ena b'chinas ischalkus adayin. Because the chesed of ima is still carrying the energy. Chesed is a flow. The gvuras of ima shape things. So the gvuras of Abba, meaning like the so-called shapeless shapes in Chochma, become the shaped shapelessness of Chochma becomes the shapeless shapes of Binah, which then will flow into Gvura, which will then give it real shape. V'chein b'midas, and the same with the midas. V'chein midas mizeh, v'chein b'midas mizeh u'b'chinas iskalos v'sachda shalehem. And the same thing with the midas, like we said before, from Chochma comes their interconnectivity and their unification. Because Chochma is within the world of distinction, focuses on its shapelessness. So it's shapelessness within the world of shapes, if you wish to put it that way. It creates that experience where all of you is elevated into, absorbed into a higher state. Okay, so this needs, I gave some explanations, it needs more, but I'm going to stop here. But I'll stop also for any questions. I will explain tomorrow a little more what this means. Remember, go back to the point. It's trying to bring a divine experience that's beyond shapes and distinction into our consciousness. That's Chochma. So it's that type of interface. Binah is carrying it more into the structure. Chochma is still as deep as far as you can go within structure, but that's why it's like so-called the shapeless structure, like the Nakuda. That's why you have a spark. You have the seed, and the example of the face. And with Koil and Dibur, he made a yesh leimer that's a step lower, because Koil does get shaped by the sound gets shaped by the specific sounds it expresses. Okay. Anybody want to comment or ask anything?
Can you apply this to the first and second luchos?
I mean, they're both engraved in stone. One is engraved through and through.
Maybe even a higher level.
I don't know. And if you could, how would it help you?
You know, you can say that about a lot of things I've been learning here.
I don't know, I'd have to think about it. I mean, you probably could explain it that way somewhat, because the engraved letters in the first luchis didn't darken the stone. I don't know about the two luchis. It does speak about two forms of engraving. One where the engraving, even though it's within the object itself, but it darkens that area, like a shades it. And then there's a luchis that he says through and through, where nothing is, it's like the letters are through and through the stone, not just partially. And that's a deeper level, that it's all part of the same stone.
Yeah,
Let's talk about that. I don't know if you can
both sides the same, even though it would be the opposite of the letter, you know.
So I'm saying it's possible.
It's a higher level, I think, than even this.
No, it's possible to connect them. He doesn't connect them right here, but I have to think about it some more. Any other questions?